to build a net zero future. So this is a side event at the Asia Pacific Climate Week, yeah, it's a side event organized by the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction and the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. My name is Anna Zinnecke. I will be your moderator for this session. And yeah, I'm very happy to lead you through this program. Great, and I think we start with a little bit of housekeeping. So next slide, please. Yeah, just so you know, the session is being recorded. So by being here, you agree to be there. And yeah, please remember to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. And yeah, we also want this to be an interactive side event. So do use the chat function and feel free to react. And if you would like to speak, you can also raise your hand. Yeah, and I think without much further ado, we will officially start the event. So yeah, just really quickly, why are we here? Yeah, buildings are an immense issue in the climate discussion. So buildings make up 40% of emissions. And while we should be actually heading towards zero carbon, the building sector is still growing, the emissions are growing. And I think the number is that we're adding the size of Paris to the global built surface area every week. So yeah, I think this is the reason why we're here. And of course, NDCs and climate targets, climate strategies are an excellent tool to kind of address these sectors. But we all know that for buildings and construction, we're not there yet. So this is why we have this webinar today. We want to look into what's already happening in countries, what are best practices, what are countries doing, and to discuss what could be done to reinforce this and make these targets really effective and yeah, very ambitious, so we can move fast towards the target of, well, decarbonizing the building sector, a daunting task. Great, and I think we have a look at the agenda. So we will start with one short opening where we have a little reminder why it's so important to speak about buildings and construction in Asia in the context of climate change. Then we will have experts for a panel discussion where we really see the country experience in setting and implementing NDCs for the building sector with experiences from India and Vietnam. And then we have a presentation where we hear about international experiences and also international support on financing and implementing NDCs. So we'll hear about roadmaps, building programs, the NDC toolkit to really see kind of like, what could be done to spread the practices from country, but also really boost and support them. And then we have time for Q&A. So yeah, I think I invite all of you, we said it already, please post any questions in the chat while we go along, and we will monitor them and have a chance to discuss at the end. Okay, and so I think without further talk, let's get going. We start with Jonathan Jewin from Global ABC and UNEP. He works in the cities unit in charge of the buildings and construction portfolio, and he will introduce us to the question of why are we here? Why is it so important to talk about buildings and construction in Asia in the context of climate change? So Jonathan, I invite you to switch on your camera and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. So yeah, I mean, you already mentioned a bit that, the importance of the sector. I think since 5 years now, we have established the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which was actually, I think, a first kind of milestone in terms of raising, the importance of this sector in the context of the climate change convention specifically, and especially trying to get all the actors around the table to really move towards more action towards a zero emission, efficient and resilient building and construction sector. We have about 184 members and 33 countries that have already joined the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And for the five last years, we've been tracking the progress of the sector by issuing our annual Building and Construction Global Status Report. The next iteration will, of course, be issued before the COP this year. Also at the COP this year, there will be a dedicated Buildings Day. So the topic is really getting traction, I think, globally at the decision maker level, that really this is a key sector. Generally for the economies in countries, because it's one of the major sector in general that contributes to the local economy, contributes to jobs, and at the same time it's a very resource consuming sector overall. So whether it's overall in terms of emission, of course it leads to a very big share of emissions in the countries. I mean, it's actually about 40% of global energy-related GHG emissions, so that's a very important share. So taking action in this sector is therefore really critical for meeting the Paris Agreement and exceeding the current of level ambitions in the national NDCs specifically. So, and as you said, while a number of parties already have referenced buildings and construction in their NDCs. At the moment, I would say the actions are very few specific actions are included. There's been some progress over the last years, and it's getting traction, but certainly more work needs to be done to actually really specify stronger mitigation targets overall for the sector. I mean, one big challenge, I think, is really about the data in the sector. It's very difficult to find good data and actually to be able to kind of show at the national level really what the contributions can be and be able to really project in terms of the targets. So there's quite a bit of work to be done. And the other part, of course, that makes it challenging is that there are a lot of actors that are involved when we talk about buildings and construction. And you really need to bring all the actors together to achieve some kind of collective, I would say, impact if we want to succeed. So at the Global ABC, with all the partners that we have, we've been developing what we call buildings and construction roadmaps. I mean, we started with developing a global roadmap to help a little bit overall, I would say, the global community to think about where do you need to act and how can you actually transform the sector to a climate resilient, zero emissions and resource efficient sector. And especially looking at how this can contribute to the Paris Agreement and reducing basically getting to these specific targets. And there were regional roadmaps also developed as based on that. So we started with a global roadmap and then moved to regional roadmaps, one in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And they are setting the pathway for decarbonization towards 2050. So, and the roadmaps, they are taking a holistic approach. I mean, discussing with all the experts, basically, we came up with 8 key themes that need to be considered, in a sense, if you want to do the holistic transformation of the sector, ranging from urban planning, new buildings, existing buildings, building operations, appliances and systems, materials, resilience, and clean energy. And we are now working with a number of partners, and including the PEEP, to actually decline those roadmaps to the national level, so that we can develop roadmaps that support really the NDC implementation in the countries, and that are modeled then on the model that we'll be putting forward for the global ABC roadmap in general. And we are linking it to some guidance that we have developed for integrating specifically actions into building and construction actions into the NDCs. The Asia roadmap showed that construction in Asia is really booming. I mean, this is not news. I think everybody knows it. But as you were saying, is like half of the new constructions in the world by 2040 will happen in the Asian region. So it's really a key region in terms of construction. The energy demand, especially for cooling in those regions, is expected to grow significantly. Already today, the operation of buildings in ASEAN, China, and India accounted for 27% of the final energy use. and 24% of energy-related CO2 emissions. So it's a really big share that this represents the cooling issue. And there, of course, when we talk about cooling, I think the important thing is to think about how can we avoid or at least avoid the use of the need for energy for cooling. And that can happen a lot through thinking about, better design of the buildings and probably using some better materials. On the material side, materials have a very heavy carbon footprint, of course, so that is a very important topic to look into also. 44% of the countries in Central, South, and East and Southeast Asia have at the moment some mandatory or voluntary building energy codes, which is already a very nice step. I mean, the challenge, I guess, is also to get all these codes enforced and moving to the step, and also probably a number of them still need to kind of raise the ambition of some of the codes. In some countries, those codes don't exist yet. If you take examples like Cambodia, they are in the process now of really establishing national building technical regulation and codes. So yeah. The ambition gaps, I mean, in terms of the gaps that we have realized is really, well, what I was mentioning, the compliance with the building energy codes at the moment. So the enforcement and compliance, looking more at the whole life carbon approach or life cycle assessment from design all the way to decommissioning buildings, passive design, and then, as I mentioned, data gaps is really key part to address in the region. And then, well, the informal sector represents a real challenge, and then pushing towards more labeling of the building components. I'm going to wrap up quickly, but we have at the Global ABC a coordination hub for roadmaps. So we are inviting any country that is working on some roadmaps in the sector or who is interested in to join us in that work. We are already working at the moment. We have 18 organizations that are participating, with 2 sub-regions presented, some sub-regional roadmaps, like in ASEAN, there are IEAs developing a roadmap for the sector, also one for cooling. We have one in the EU, one in the Middle East, and then 7 national actually roadmaps are also being developed, including in Asia. We have 2 specifically, which are Cambodia and Vietnam, which will be issued very soon. I think I'll stop here because I'm taking too much time, and I will now hand it over again, I guess, to Anna to take us further in the event. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. And I think you set us up really well for the discussion we have now by kind of drawing the picture of, well, the challenge that we're facing, but also really kind of like what the opportunities are. And I think that's what we're going to attack right now. So we want to look into countries that have really moved forward and have best practices to show. So I'm going to invite our panel to switch on their camera. So we have both 2 colleagues from India and Vietnam. And we will do 2 rounds of questions. So we basically split it up. We said first, we want to talk about, setting targets, how do you do that? And then we'll move to implementing targets because, setting targets is only kind of, one part of the story. So, let me start with Mr. Saurabh Didi. He's a director at the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India. And here I'll actually have to read for my screen to let you know what he's working on. So right now he's in charge of energy efficiency in buildings and transport. Before he worked on, or he was in charge of the standards and labeling program, awareness, international cooperation. He also developed the Perform, Achieve, and Trade mechanism in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And also very important, he formulated and managed the national mission for enhanced energy efficiency in India, and that was under the National Action Plan for Climate Change. And I think when you talk about India, I love to give these figures. The NMEE plan, it targeted to unleash investment worth $12 billion on energy efficiency. So I think these are very impressive figures. And Mr. Didi would love to hear from you about the experience in India in, basically setting targets for this not always easy sector, the buildings and construction sector. And yeah, and very concretely, I think it would be great to hear from you about the NDC, about the work you do with the IEA on developing a roadmap, and basically how this all fits together. So, Mr. Diddy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to give a background about the construction sector, that it consumes significant amount of energy as well as emissions are there. But 12% of GDP is also from the construction sector, so that has a huge potential. Uh, there is a saying that 1/3 of India is built, 2/3 of is yet to be built. So you can imagine that how much more construction is going to happen. And so that's why these targets for implementation of codes in the country is very, very, very essential. Not only codes, but all other aspects from the energy perspective. So we have started developing this roadmap few years back, but before that as well, we gave targets to all the states to notify, first of all, energy conservation building codes in the respective state. As this is a state specific subject, and there are a lot of things, for example, right from the notifications to legal aspects, everything we covered for them. So we established energy conservation building cells in each state. So we have uh, placed 4 to 5 professionals in each state so that they can handhold the state officials, and so that they can get it notified and start implementation of energy conservation for the building sector. So that way we have started, and now this is more or less in place. So we have 20 states out of 35 which have notified energy conservation building code, and what we are expecting that by end of this year, every state will notify energy conservation building code for the commercial buildings. Now, but the thing is that notification is only one step. So that's why in the roadmap we have included number of other things as well. For example, Jonathan said that materials is one of the major issue in case of implementation, and 44% I think he said that it consumes energy. And what we observed while discussion with developers, that they are willing to reduce time, but they are not willing to get that material which is energy efficient. So that's why we have identified various we included these things as well while discussion of roadmap, so that these things will be there. So we have organized our roadmap into 4 or 5 areas. I'll say new buildings, first of all, for example, codes and regulatory measures which will be there for them. Then for the material aspect, we are including these materials in the SORs, that is specifications for the rates by our government departments. Then we are implementing in the systems and operation, integration of clean energy, as well as urban planning. So in all those areas we are trying to incorporate our roadmap, and we are giving targets for 2025, 2030, and then 2047, so that we can reach towards net zero energy buildings. And that is the main goal for building sector, that all the buildings are either net zero or moving towards the passive concept. So that's how we are looking at this. You are on mute, Anna.
And I was talking about Teams being a bit funny these days. So thank you. Great, thank you very much. So I think we'll just move to our second expert, Kim Tua from Vietnam, to kind of add the Vietnam perspective to this. And I think if you could also switch on your camera. And yeah, so meanwhile, I'll introduce you. So Vuchit Kim Tua is an expert, a Vietnamese green building expert, who currently works as a senior program officer for the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings in Vietnam, so in the GIZ office. And she works very closely with various departments, agencies, and institutes under the Ministry of Construction in Vietnam. And some of the work she promoted in the past was, so she contributed to the Green Growth Action Plan by the Ministry of Construction. Then she was involved very closely on the developing a technical concept for a national green financing program for energy efficient and low emission housing for in the affordable segment, which is also very interesting. And then she's currently working with the Ministry of Construction on integrating the climate aspects into the Vietnam housing development strategy. So yeah, I think there is a lot going on in Vietnam. And so I would invite Thoa to please tell us a bit about what Vietnam is currently doing to advance the climate action in the buildings and construction sector, especially what's happening with the NDC roadmap, and yeah, how this all fits together. So the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. Yeah, first of all, allow me to say thank you, Anna. Thank you, the organizer of the event, so that we have a time slot for Vietnamese case study. Actually, we are here to work with a few ministries in Vietnam, so that the issues of incorporating building and construction sector in the NDC overall can be done. As you know that by the methodology, the NDC cover the energy use sector, and then our name, I mean construction and building name, is not clearly stated out on that. And then looking at the construction and building sector, contribution to NDC can be seen from many different aspects or angles. For example, now in Vietnam, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment is drafting and finalizing the government decree on how to make the GHG mitigation implemented. So that's the NDC commitment of Vietnam of reducing 9% overall compared to the year 2014 can be done by every each of the sector is so difficult and challenging. For example, in construction sector, they only listed cement production industry and the lamp industry, but then building is nowhere, because building is hiding behind the name of electrical appliances, HVAC, and envelope. So, but how we really can make all of those measures to reduce GHG emission to be implemented is really challenge, because the country and the economy is governing by the sector, not by every each of appliance. Even the Ministry of Industry and Trade already have the labeling program. Then who will make those appliances to be installed in the building? That is a challenge. So we are working on that. So try to get the building sector name into the NDC round table, that what NDC, what the construction sector can be contributed, and that is where our NDC building roadmap that we are developing now under the methodology of the global ABC, following the regional ABC, regional NDC building roadmap. So the one for Vietnam is drafting up, but still on the way to be bought in by Vietnamese party. Then they can see how the implementation path can be actually effective. So on that, we also choosing the most effective subsector, that is the housing, because overall all of the building sector, housing is one of the most important type of building that the government feels their responsibility for. And within the housing sector, we focus on the low income and mid income, because that is where the demand comes most. And then in our market today, the supply is not meeting the demand for that subsector. Why the high profile housing is on stock. So then we working very closely with HREM, the Housing and Real Estate Market Management Bureau under the Ministry of Construction, try to incorporate the NDC target into the housing development strategy that the Ministry of Construction finalizing on this week, so that they can see that with the target of 12 million square meter for social housing, how much we can do making it become energy efficient housing, or higher ambition, go up to the green housing. So that is a few things that we want to see, and the target already done by the government, 9% reduction. But then how to really elaborate it into the construction sector, into the transportation sector, into the housing sector is our job to really elaborate it in based on the fact and the data available and the political will and the commitment by the government. So in that context, the Vietnam NDC building roadmap that we are writing up have a really special approach that we go directly from what can be possible from the building, like how we can do in the new building, how we can do in the urban planning, and what we can do in the retrofit. All of those things drafting up, and then try to see the land, so that the background, so that those measures can be implemented. That is choosing the subsector that's mostly can be implemented quickly and then with the most effective way.
Yeah. Great, thanks a lot for that experience from Vietnam. And I think, yeah, I think from everything I hear, that point about information, having the data, knowing what's actually happening, and knowing where you could act and what could be, you know, effective actions to actually reach that overall target. No, because very often you have that overall one big number of CO2 emissions that you want to save. And basically, how to redistribute that is, well, it's often a political debate, but that really needs to be grounded in good data about what is actually happening. Yeah. Great. So as we move from, well, setting the targets to the also not so easy task of implementing these targets, I would also like to ask for your ideas and for your experience in how that could actually possibly work. So yeah, I think I'll first turn to India and Mr. Didi, asking you, yeah, so you have clearly very ambitious targets for the building sector. So how do you go about delivering on these targets? I mean, what are the actions that you do? And I think, yeah, we all know there's often a few obstacles to overcome. So yeah, what experience could be, do you have in India, and how could that be helpful for, I think, our audience here? Mm-hmm.
And I'm just keeping myself for the building sector. For NDC targets, what our total target for India was 33%, and accordingly it was distributed for this building sector. But while implementation, we have tried to have a multi-pronged approach. That because when we are saying that these are the energy efficient codes which you have to construct your building according to these codes, there are a number of issues, other issues which are still lying. For example, whether that kind of material is available in that particular state, whether we have architects or developers who are actually ready to build such buildings. So first of all, we divided our codes into two segments, as Thua said, that for the residential sector and for the commercial buildings, because both construction styles are different, requirements are different. So we have identified, we have developed these two codes, and then we have notified these two codes in all the states. Then at this time, we need to have architects, first of all, to develop or to design those buildings. So we are doing for last 4-5 years training for almost more than 5,000 people every year who are trained for these codes, and they will actually design these buildings. And for this year, we have a target before next 15th of August, which is our Independence Day. By that, we will have 10,000 more people who will be trained for on energy these codes itself. So that we'll have a workforce for implementation. Then not only this, we are developing examination, which we'll be calling as energy auditors buildings. And those will be people who will verify these buildings, and that regulations for those examination is also out in the public for public consultation. And probably by end of this year, we will have those examination. So these people will actually verify those buildings and say that these are the right, what they have to do. Then coming to the materials aspect, we have developed a website called Buildings Material Directory, in which people can, any developer, any architect, and any normal person can go to that website and check whether this material, whatever material is mentioned, is really energy efficient or not. And and they can compare between 4 or 5 or 10 materials along with that. For example, insulation type A, B, C, D, all those insulations they can compare, and they can check in my climatic zone what will be the impact of this kind of insulation, what will be the impact of with my orientation. And we have also designed a tool in which he can design his building and then use these building material directory materials in that tool, and he can check what will be actual impact on his building as well. So that's an advanced tool we are designing. So hopefully this building material directory we are going to launch on 16th of this month. So you can treat as a teaser for that. So that will help in identification. But not only this, these materials you can check whether these are energy efficient, but you can check whether these are available in your respective areas or not. So all those things will be included in the building material directory. Now, we have material, we have codes, we have system in place, but still people will not go for energy efficient designs. And reason is that we are in the zone or in the era when we have a fast food meal or fast food is available to eat. So what we did, that similar to the fast food, we have designed a booklet where we have almost, for this we started for residential sector. We are having 2,500 building designs for residential sector. So whether it's a 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, or double loaded, single loaded, that kind of structure, you decide a structure, you decide how many bedrooms you have, and then you can pick up directly from that booklet, and you can go for construction. So it will have each and every aspect for energy efficient design. You don't have to design it, you don't have to select a material, just pick that thing, and you can go and construct your building. So small developers who are not willing to pay much to the architects for designing of energy efficient building can utilize that. So these are the broad areas which we are right now working. Then with respect to roadmap, we are also doing number of other things as well. For example, when we have to go to net zero or near zero energy buildings, so we initiated a project called 100 net zero building project, and we have identified 100 projects, and we sent our technical team to those 100 projects, and they developed a report that how these existing buildings can be converted into net zero. So that these buildings can be, then we will invest in those buildings. So we are developing a program where we will give some kind of incentive or some kind of a subsidy to to the building construction people, so that they can construct energy efficient buildings. So this is in brief. If I have more time, I can tell you much more details, but in brief, these are the few things which we are doing for to achieve our targets for NDC.
Excellent. Yeah. And I see, I mean, we all know it's a tricky sector sometimes, no? But I also see that it sparks creativity in terms of using the fast food approach to a pick and choose approach to energy efficient building designs. And I very much liked how many different food items you have on the menu, no? Because I think we all know you need a building that is really adapted to your climate zone. So basically you need the right fast food in the right place. Excellent. And I think with a view to the time, I think we need to speed up just a little bit. So now we want to turn to Vietnam. And I would like to ask Kim Dua whether she can give us the Vietnamese perspective, because I think there's also quite a bit on what is happening in Vietnam to implement the climate targets, and yeah, basically where the current priorities are. And yeah, just to ask you to be a little bit brief, so we still have time for the discussion. And I'm also inviting our audience to pose all the questions that you want to dig deeper in the chat, please. The floor is yours.
From the overall picture by the Ministry of Natural Resource Environment, the coordinator for NDC implementation, they identify 80% of the measure is related to building. All of the appliance and then solar power, water heater, and all of those things. But then that is the measure of the technical of the system inside the building. Okay, but then from Ministry of Construction, their view is more broader. They said, okay, even all of the technology is available, but who asked for that? The investor asked for that. The government asked for that or not? If the investor, if the owner don't ask for that, the architect don't have a job, don't have a request for designing it. So from MOC, they are focused on, okay, revising all of those things with two target. Development target is to provide enough square meter of the building as green or energy efficient. Under what? Put it into the national social and economic and development plan, so that it becomes the mandate that every ministry have to do it, every sector, every province have to do the job. And then they have to request for that, and they incorporate the climate target into that under the two names, not only GHG mitigation, but also adaptation and resilience, because Vietnam is so exposing to the climate change. So it becomes urgent as a development objective. So that is the number. But one is incorporate all of the climate target into the normal planning process of the government. And secondly, where the money come from? Okay, the money from foreigner, from outside become more and more expensive because of pandemic, because of COVID. So inside the country, they look at the government budget very limited. They don't want to borrow more money, but then look at the corporate bond and then changing it to the green bond. So slowly financing mechanism is put it in. One is a political will, two is the money, and three, okay, institutional setup so that measure can be implemented, so that they can put it. Every municipality government have to make up their mind to build up the housing development plan for themselves to make sure that development goal is achieved. But then now from the Ministry of Construction, they want to include also the green and energy efficient target into the every square meter of the newly constructed building by changing the energy efficiency building code and then the apartment building code as well. So in Vietnam, we have about 17 building code together, but then if you have to comply with all of those codes, then automatically the CO2 reduction can be realized. So the way they do it, and they will, one step further, is down to the cost norm. Okay, for every square meter, if you keep the cost norm too low, then energy efficiency measure have no way to implement it. Then the government reviews the cost norm for every square meter of the construction. And then the cost norm, and then again, like India, we come back to our capacity, whether we have enough engineer, architect who can do the job. So the training, as in India, we do in the last 7 years, and then the number is not as impressive as India. We have only about 500 students training a year. Not you have 2,500, right? Something like that. But we are smaller. But that is in the same direction. So that is all of those things we see as the elements for effective implementation.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, I think, again, listening to you, you really brought that point across, like how the different levels, and how the different parts have to come together. It's not something you can address with just one measure, but you actually need kind of like the capacity in place. Then you need the drive from policy, and then also, I think you called it money very rightly. I think that question on what you can do to really mobilize investments. Thank you very much. I think this was our first round of the panel discussion. I think we'll come back to you for the questions. And now we will switch to one presentation that we have. And I would invite Andreas Gruner. He will speak to us about, what basically are the international tools available for that. And just with a look to the time, Andreas, well, in Germany, it's 10:43. I think in Japan, it's 5:45. I think just, Andreas, if you could speed up a little bit in the middle, I think then we can still save a bit of time for the questions. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, dear guests of this webinar, dear all, I would like to present you very briefly some experiences from our program for energy efficiency in buildings on NDC implementation and financing towards zero carbon buildings. Next slide, please. Our program for energy efficiency in buildings is an effort of the French and German governments, financed by the French and German governments, and implemented by the French Development Agency, AFD, ADEME, and GIZ. And we are supporting, basically, we are cooperating very closely with the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction and pushing the global agenda ahead. Next slide, please. If you look, just a quick look at the building and construction sector, we all know it's a really highly fragmented sector. We can see that very well if you think about the experts of the governments inside the environmental ministries. If they look at the different categories where emissions arise from buildings and construction, according to the IPCC main categories. Next slide, please. You can see that building sector emissions are almost in each category. It's from production of building construction materials, operation of buildings through combustion of biomass and other fuels, and everywhere are emissions. That really poses a challenge to governments to see how to take action. And the challenge, next slide, is to see how can effective NDCs for buildings and construction be developed. This is what we are pushing in our program, supporting 5 partner countries. What we see is what we find out that NDCs lack, in most countries, lack clear targets and implementation roadmaps. And there are really long-term strategies missing. They are very often isolated activities or strategies, but not really in a holistic manner. And here we are cooperating closely with the NDC partnership, with the Global ABC, of course, but also UNFCCC on elaborating NDC building sector roadmaps, how to approach systematically mitigation adaptation targets for the building sector, and how to support governments and policymakers. The next slide, please. If you look at the finance side for energy efficient buildings, nearly zero carbon buildings need financing. If you look at reality, just looking at the last 2020 global status report on buildings from the Global ABC, we see that only a fraction of all global investments for buildings really go today into energy efficiency or renewable energies for buildings. It's just about below 3% of the 5.8 trillion US dollars so far. And there's a huge need really to redirect those investments on a low carbon track, because those buildings are going to be built anyway. And if not energy efficient, then they will stand there for a long time with long-term emissions locked in, for posing huge challenges for future governments and for all of us. Next slide, please. In our program, we are in close dialogue with having AFD as French Development Bank as implementation partner and being member of the IDFC Cooperation Network. We are in close contact on talking about criteria and common visions for sustainable finance for buildings. And there's a new dynamic also with the Green Deal of the European Union, the EU taxonomy classification system, to really say what is sustainable investment according to specific criteria, either mitigation, adaptation, or biodiversity targets. And this discussion will have a huge impact also on global investments and the finance sector. And here we need to talk about common criteria, because there's a lot of confusion also what is green finance for buildings. The next slide, please. So just summarizing, NPV support governments in partner countries and the global discussion on preparing large-scale finance for green buildings and supporting policies mainly on NDC targets and also building codes and so on. Next one, I just show you briefly 2 examples from our support, our work in countries. One closer look to Vietnam on the NDC roadmap, which Mrs. Kim Tua mentioned before in the panel discussion. Next slide, please. The government of Vietnam just recently, by September last year, updated its NDC commitments, putting new targets, raising the ambition. And of course, the building sector matters to achieve the climate targets in the future. And active are the Environmental Ministry and the Construction Ministry. Next slide, please. Who we are cooperating with, and what we are doing is we are supporting the Vietnamese government in developing one national NDC roadmap for the buildings and construction sector. This is just a rough timeline work that started a year ago, a bit longer, on having experts and government authorities and academics involved in stakeholder discussions to define targets, meaningful targets for NDC actions in buildings. Next slide. And the methodology is building actually on the global APC regional roadmap for buildings and construction in Asia, which has been developed by Global APC with the International Energy Agency. And what I mentioned before, the building construction sector is so highly fragmented. Here, with this methodology, we are sort of structuring this complex sector according to really practical areas and action fields, which are all along the entire building construction value chain. So you can see the methodology looks at urban planning, because green buildings, sustainable buildings, low carbon buildings start with good urban master planning, urban design in cities. We look at new buildings, building retrofits, but also at the operational stage in buildings and the materials, low carbon materials. And for each of those areas in this roadmap, which we are developing for Vietnam, there will be main fields of action, key actions to be defined in the mid-term, mid, short, and long term, 2030, 2040, and 2050, the vision towards 2050. And this roadmap will be a steering document for the government in taking action in all those different action fields. And the idea is also that this roadmap is a living steering document, so it needs regular updates and revisions. The next slide, please. Just a quick look into the new buildings action field. As you can imagine, it's a complex issue. Just summarizing, in the case of Vietnam, that key actions will focus on encouraging passive building design, climate adapted building design, natural ventilation, and the life cycle approach along the building value chain. And here in detail in this roadmap, we talk about the building codes and regulations, which have been mentioned before, which need updates, increased ambitions, and targets are formulated for this segment. The next one, please. The same for building retrofits. We look at what building measures really are needed in the short term, and how policymakers need to react to improve regulations, to push market developments, to provide those measures and stimulate and demand by regulations the applications. The next one, please. The building roadmap also has elements for effective implementation, like the institutional arrangements. The important would be that there would be a leading agency or entity in Vietnam coordinating the entire roadmap activities and the implementation, also setting MRV structures and requirements. So this roadmap also serves in mainstreaming the key actors towards one direction. Stakeholder engagement, just to mention, private sector mobilization will be key really to implement in the mid and long term all the ambitious actions and developing climate finance strategies for mobilizing all those investments, publics and privates. The next one, this was a short insight into the roadmap for Vietnam. Next one, talking about NDC implementation and direct contributions from the building sector towards NDC targets. In Vietnam, the Ministry of Construction is preparing, with support from PEEP, the development of a large green housing program for affordable housing. Just a quick look at the figures, which Kim Thoa mentioned before. It's really a booming segment in the construction sector at national level in Vietnam. If you just look back at the last few years, the segment of mid-income housing, lower mid-income housing, affordable mid-income housing is growing very fast. And with this segment, the next slide, please, you can see that there's a really critical key target group which is going to be addressed by this green housing program. The young urban families who, due to rising incomes, have higher demand for cooling or for energy use in their buildings, in their apartments. They have a growing demand for their space per apartment, for their living space, and though the energy consumption might not yet be very high at the moment, it's predicted to grow very fast, like in so many other countries in hot climate zones. And very important, this target group also is participating in the global equity, in the commercial equity market. So it can be addressed by loans, by commercial loans, by concessional loans and credits to participate in the program. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, without going in too much into detail, the green housing program intends to address the supply and demand side. At the same time, housing developers need a hand on improving their designs, and some incentives through finance, and the demand side, the households who are buying the apartments, of course, need support. And all is moved around introducing, developing a national housing registry where really data is built up and control and verification is monitored over time. This is it as a short input from experience, what we are doing. Next slide, please. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's only just one short concluding, very short information. Together with the global APC, the Global Buildings and Policy Buildings Performance Network, Peter Graham is joining us in this webinar, the director of GBPN. We are developing one NDC Buildings Toolkit. This is building actually on the NDC Buildings Guide, which has been developed by Peter and Global APC 2-3 years back. And it will be a collection of practical tools, country examples, and advice to how to, next slide please, how to get a better overview at the national building stock. Next one please, in a country. Next one please. And according to mapping what what is the building stock, what are key policies, key obstacles and barriers, then prioritizing mitigation actions, and really deciding on implementing and monitoring structures. The next slide, please. This toolkit is built around these 3 steps: mapping, prioritizing, implementing. Next one, please. And it's built around the key questions which our policy and decision makers are asking themselves. What should I do step by step in designing my meaningful NDC actions for the building sector? Next step. Next slide, please. One more, please. Yeah, and this is just to show the categories where you will find then useful tools and country examples. And the last one, next slide, please, is we all invite you, of course, to join us in this discussion, because this NDC Buildings Toolkit is meant to be a living toolkit. Soon, the Global APC will provide a collaborative platform web space at their website where you can actually have a look at the toolkit and contribute your experiences. With those words, I would like to thank you for your attention, and let's have the Q&A session. Back to Anna, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. This was great, and I think you covered a lot of ground in not that much time. So I mean, we have Andreas here and also Peter Graham, who's working on the toolkit. So we'll have a quick look at the questions, and I'm very mindful of the time. We have 3 minutes to wrap up. So I think we'll start with a very practical question. So we have 2 people asking for contact details of the experts to follow up the conversations. So, I mean, being in Germany and super mindful of data protection, I think I'm not going to post email addresses here in the chat. But what we could do, and maybe I could ask the colleagues from the Global ABC, would be to give the contact details of Global ABC, so we could forward any requests to the colleagues. And I think it would also be very helpful to have the kind of the sign up for the Global ABC newsletter. And we can also post this for PEEP, because I think this is where kind of the information about the toolkit, once it's online, can be shared. Hope that is and then we have a very specific question, and I think this is directly for Mr. Didi from the BEE. I'm just quickly gonna read it to you. So thank you for the introduction into the activities by BEE. And just like myself, a lot of excitement about the Building Materials Directory, but also the other initiatives. And 2 questions to you. So the one question was about the roadmap, and basically what the targets are. But I think, you know, if this is something we can say already now, but I think this is also a process that's under development. But I think maybe the information where this could be followed, and there was another 2 questions. So the question, is it only new build or is it also the existing building stock? And about the involvement of Global ABC. So I think 3 questions packaged in one, and I think this is for Mr. Didi.
Okay. First question is how we are developing that roadmap. That we had a discussion with various stakeholders, 2 rounds of discussion we already had, and we have drafted a draft roadmap. And due to this pandemic, this got delayed, but otherwise we could have had further more stakeholder discussions. I think 2 or 3 rounds of further stakeholder discussion is going to happen in the month of July and August. So if they can send me their email IDs, we can invite them as well for the discussion on the roadmap. It includes everything: existing buildings, it includes new buildings, it includes building material, it includes even urban planning as well. So we have kept all the aspects checked in the roadmap, so that maybe every activity we will not do from Bureau. For example, urban planning, there will be a separate agency who will do. But we try to include everything so that it is a comprehensive roadmap for the building sector. So so that way we have devised. So we have a 2025 plan, we have 2035 plan, we have 2047 plan. So that will be 100 years of our country's independence. So that way we have linked, not instead of 2050. So those things we have already done. So what was the third question I missed?
Oh, it was just about whether you're working with Global ABC on this.
We are working with IEA on this, International Energy Agency, but we can work with Global ABC as well if things will move in the right direction.
Great, and I think IEA is working very closely with the Global ABC, so there's a lot of connections.
Indirectly, yes, but.
No. Great, and I just see there's 2 more questions in the chat, but I think the colleagues would like to ask them themselves, and I'm just mindful that we're one. Oh, excellent. So the question just came through. So we have 2 questions, and we will just have a look at them and try to summarize them in one, because I think this is our last kind of the final round. So how will you go for net zero carbon footprints in existing buildings and new buildings you're planning to construct where you have to use fossil fuel-based energy? Well, I mean, I think you're in charge of energy efficiency, right? Not the power supply, but a very interesting question, and we'll just maybe combine it with the last one. What is the status of sustainable building and decarbonization of buildings at the global level by 2030? What are the possible solutions? So I think maybe the last question I'm gonna try to wrap up in my concluding remarks, and I would pass on that question about, you know, how do you combine, well, I think on the one hand, energy efficiency, but also the question of power supply, probably.
Actually, it's not easy to do everything, because for the existing building, reaching net zero is really difficult, and because of the various constraints that already it is constructed and area required. So we have devised an approach. We are calling it as near zero building, net zero building, and net positive building. So near zero is like 15 units of electricity per annum per meter square. So that also we are covering into the net zero domain. But at the same time, we are in the discussion that green energy or green supply they can utilize for through the grid itself, and how things will move in future we don't know, but because that is not in our hand, that is in hand of the discoms, distribution companies. So we are in discussions that how we can have a green supply, green power, and so that we can have a net zero completely, because our economy is, electricity is primarily fossil fuel. But as you have seen, number of targets, 175 gigawatts from renewable energy is going to be get. So those things may change future as well.
Great.
For the last question, I think you need to have a full day's discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So I will still try to wrap that up, and I think also trying to wrap up a really very full discussion, a very full conversation, discussion, a lot of inputs from countries. And I would also like to ask all our panelists and speakers to switch on the camera, like just for a last goodbye. And just like for me, what I noted as a takeaway from the session, I mean, I think we all know, you know, an NDC is often a number. No, it's one figure, one percentage that you want to reduce. And the really question is like, what comes underneath? No, I mean, how do you break that down for the building sector? Also knowing, as I think our colleague Kim Chao from Vietnam pointed out really rightly, you know, catching the building sector is sometimes not so easy, no, because it's not one thing. It's kind of, it's appliances, it's the building envelope, it's the power supply. It really has to fit together. Really crucial is that aspect of data. So what do we know? Kind of what do we have to convince policymakers? So I think this is really the basis. That's what I heard from all of you. You have to bring these the variety of actors together that are involved. Capacity plays a really big role. And then you need to make a plan. No? You need to come up with smart steps of how could you tackle these different aspects of the building sector. And I think we also heard, yeah, this question of finance is really important. Kind of like what kind of finance mechanisms can you use to incentivize like a whole sector with, you know, everyone living in their house, like, you know, developers working on a lot of like very, you know, individual projects. I think you need that policy and financing angle to really kind of influence the sector. And yeah, I think we all know that we're not there yet for, you know, net zero in the building sector. I mean, at the moment, we're still going in the other direction. As a quick answer to the question of decarbonization of buildings at the global level, I just posted a link to the resources from the Global ABC. So every year they post the global status report, which really sums up the data that is available and basically then also points to the future, like where are we now? And there's a tracker involved where you clearly see, you know, this is where we have to get by 2050, and we're here. So, you know, this is really a call to action for a lot more happening in the building sector. And I think we'll all take the experiences that we heard from today. And I think, yeah, we all have to do a lot more to tackle this sector, bearing in mind that it's not only about kind of reducing emissions, but it's really also about, no, it's a very important sector economically. And in the end, it's about having buildings that are comfortable, you know, that you're not too hot in the summer or suffering from like, you know, kind of the opposite of getting roasted by an air conditioning, but really having buildings that are comfortable, good to live in a good urban environment, and that maybe save you a bit of money. So thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks a lot also to the people that we can't see who are monitoring the chat, making sure this was running so smoothly. We finished 7 minutes late, but I think the topic demanded it. And yeah, with that, I wish everyone a really good evening at the end of a long conference day. And yeah, thanks a lot for your engagement. And yeah, hoping to hear from you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great, and have a nice evening.